The sun is showing off today. It is so bright in my apartment. I'm loving it. I'm literally sitting in front of the sun, just soaking up the sunshine. I love it. March was definitely a weird month for me. I had a lot of hits, but I also had a lot of misses, and I almost found myself getting into a reading slump, but a few books saved me from going full blown into a reading slump, which I was super happy about because I just got out of a reading slump and I didn't want to get into another one. I'm just going to randomly talk about these books. They're in no particular order. The first book that I want to talk about is A Love in the Time of Serial Killers by Alicia Thompson. I had such high hopes for this book, you guys, and it was such a letdown for me. It's marketed as a romantic comedy, and I don't think I laughed even once while I was reading this book. It follows Phoebe and Sam. Phoebe is actually obsessed with serial killers, which is why I thought I would really enjoy this book, because at one point in my life I was also obsessed with serial killers. I literally went to college to study forensic psychology, so I thought I was going to be able to relate to the main character a lot in that way. But she's so obsessed with serial killers that she literally doesn't trust anyone, including her neighbor Sam. She is 100% certain that he is a serial killer and that he is murdering people in his home in the middle of the night, until she gets to know him little by little and realizes that he's in fact not a serial killer. And throughout the book, she's basically dealing with a lot of, I don't want to say daddy issues, but daddy issues, because her dad recently passed away and they hadn't had a relationship in years. She's in charge of packing up her childhood home, and she's struggling with a lot of her childhood memories of how her father treated her. Again, I thought this was going to be a fun little romantic comedy, and for me it wasn't. I feel like the two main characters didn't even have all that much chemistry. I didn't really buy their love story. I wasn't rooting for them. Clearly this is a romance book, so you want to root for the two main characters, but for this book, two main characters were just meh, especially Sam. I honestly can't tell you one thing about him that I remember, aside from the fact that he was a school teacher. I think he was a school teacher. I will say that because it deals with some childhood trauma, to look up the warnings beforehand, that way you're prepared when you go into this book. But other than that, I don't think I would recommend this book. I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read this month was The Risk by Elle Kennedy. This is the second book in the Briar You series. It's very similar to the off-campus books by Elle Kennedy. If you read those books by Elle Kennedy, then you know what I mean. It's like college romance. It deals with a lot of college hockey. This book in particular deals with kind of like enemies to lovers, fake dating, but honestly those tropes last for like 5 seconds in this book. You kind of get into the romance between the two main characters, Brenna and Jake, pretty quickly, because it's pretty obvious that they don't really hate each other. They're super attracted to one another, despite Jake being from Harvard and Brenna being from Briar U. So they're kind of hockey enemies, but they actually have a lot of chemistry, and you kind of knew that if you read The Chase, which was the book prior to this one, because you got to see them interact in that book for the first time, and it was pretty obvious that they had a lot of chemistry. There was really nothing special about it, if I'm being honest, but I just really loved Jake's and Brenna's banter with one another. I loved their love story. Their chemistry was off the charts. Overall, I just think it was a really well written book. I definitely want to continue the rest of the series. I think there's 4 books in total, so I have to pick up the 3rd and 4th book to read in April, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. If you're looking for a cute little romance, definitely check this one out. There are some deep moments in this book, which is pretty standard for Elle Kennedy. I feel like she always tackles a lot of deep issues in the books that I've read from her so far, so I would suggest to look up trigger warnings beforehand. But I really enjoyed this book and I highly recommend. I read another romantic comedy this month, and this romantic comedy was another letdown for me, and that was Secretly Yours by Tessa Bailey. This book was such a disappointment, you guys. I was so annoyed reading this book. I was so close to DNFing it, but I told myself not to, and I finished it. But I could have probably just saved myself the time and energy and DNF'd it early on, because from the very beginning I knew I wasn't going to like this book. So this one's a Grumpy Sunshine, polar opposites attract. It's a very like standard Tessa Bailey book. There's a lot of spice in the book. I feel like the spice kind of overshadows the whole romance romance plot just a bit. And this is what, my 4th Tessa Bailey book. The only books that I absolutely adored from Tessa Bailey were It Happened One Summer and Hook, Line, and Sinker. I already forgot the other book that I read from her, but I didn't like that book, whatever it was called, and I didn't like this one. And I'm starting to think that maybe Tessa Bailey books are just not for me. I just didn't really find this book all that entertaining. I didn't find it funny. I found that the female main character was really immature for her age, especially since she was, I think, 29 years old. She did a lot of questionable things in this book that could have probably landed her in jail, and the male character was just not, I don't know, he just wasn't doing it for me either, and I didn't really like them together, didn't really buy their love story. I think I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars. Let me just double check that. I don't remember, but that's what we're going with now. The next book that I read in March was Twisted Love by Anna Huang. This is the first book in the Twisted Love series. This one follows Alex and Ava. They both have had traumatic childhoods, but Alex actually remembers what happened to him as a child, whereas Ava doesn't, and that leads them to have different personalities. Like, Alex is basically an asshole. He doesn't really care about anyone's feelings, and he is willing to do whatever it takes to get revenge on the person that ruined his childhood, and he doesn't care about the consequences. Whereas Ava, again, doesn't remember what happened to her as a child. Like, people have told her what happened to her, but she doesn't really have any memories of her own. So she decides to not let that stop her from being a happy, positive person, and she views the world as a happy place, and she gives people the benefit of the doubt. So again, Alex and Ava are 2 completely different people. I absolutely loved Ava. I thought that her character was so fun. She faced so many of her fears in this book, and she realized that the only person that she truly needs in her life is herself, and to always trust herself. I found Alex to be a little too possessive for my liking. Like, there were certain parts in this book where he completely overreacted. At one point, he even put his hands on another female, and that was just like not it for me. I really couldn't go back to liking him after that point. I didn't love his character, but since I loved Ava, I actually really enjoyed this book, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And also, the writing in this book was super addicting, and it was very entertaining. Like, there was so much happening aside from the romance, and it kept me wanting to continue on reading. Like, I did not want to put this book down. So even though I really didn't like Alex and I thought that he was a walking red flag, I enjoyed how entertaining this book was. I'm excited to check out the rest of the books in the series next month. I have ink on my finger. I just noticed that. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this next book because it is the 3rd book in a series, the Shatter Me series, and if I talk too much about it, then I'm going to ruin the plot for you guys, and I don't want to do that because this book was a 5-star read for me, and that was Ignite Me. Again, a 5-star read for me. This book picks up right where the 2nd book left off. We follow Juliet, Warner, and Adam and the rest of their friend group once again. The writing in this was so good. It was so addicting. It was so entertaining. I was so proud of all the characters in this book, aside from maybe one, but I'm not going to tell you who because, again, I don't want to ruin the book for you. But if you haven't read the Shatter Me series, go read it. That's all I'm going to say. Just go pick up this series because the books just keep getting better and better. I have another fantasy series here. This one is a YA fantasy, and it's called Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. It follows Mare, who is a red. She lives in a world that's divided between reds and silvers. Reds are basically the slaves to the silver elite. The silver elites have these special powers that make them elite, whereas the reds have no powers whatsoever, which is why the silvers kind of view them as trash. Mare ends up working for the royal family, and something happens in the book where Mare actually discovers that she has a special gift of her own, even though she's a red, so she's not supposed to have any supernatural ability, but she does. And in order to keep up with the status quo and to prevent reds from rebelling even more against the silvers, the royal family decide to take in Mare as one of their own to basically pass her off as a silver, and they arrange a marriage between her and their youngest son. Through the process of that happening, Mare discovers secrets of the royal family and discovers secrets that have to do with herself. This book actually reminds me a lot of the Shatter Me series because in this book, similar to the Shatter Me series, Mare nightmare struggles with her new power, and she's trying to learn how to control it and how to use it. Overall, I definitely think that this was a really well-written book. It was super addicting. The writing was super entertaining. I will say that it was also very predictable. I was able to predict the big twist from a mile away. Even though it was predictable, I still enjoyed it, and I definitely will be picking up the rest of the series. I don't know when, but I will be reading the rest of the series very soon. Also, my fridge just turned on in case you hear it. I'm hoping that the rest of the books in the series just keep getting better. I will say that it is quite slow at the beginning, and then towards the end it definitely does pick up. But if you read a lot of fantasy books, or if you read 1 or 2 fantasy books, then you probably know that the first book in a fantasy series tends to be pretty slow because the author is taking their time in building up the world, building up the characters. So again, this one was quite slow, but it didn't really bother me because I expected it to be slow. So if you do decide to pick up this book, just know that it will be a slow burner. I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. And then I read 2 Alice Feeney books. You guys know that since I read Daisy Darker, I think in December, by Alice Feeney, one of my goals for 2023 was to read all of her books. I'm slowly accomplishing that goal. But this month I read 2 of her books. Both of them are psychological thrillers, and the first one was Sometimes I Lie. This one follows the character Amber, who wakes up in a hospital and she can't move, she can't open up her eyes, she can't speak, she's literally in a coma, but she's aware of her surroundings, kinda, and she hears what everyone is saying and doing around her. As she is laying there, her memories slowly come back to her because she has no recollection of how she ended up in a coma in the first place. Slowly she starts to remember, and she starts to put all the pieces together. This book was very, very, very slow, and I didn't really like any of the characters. I found all the characters to be problematic. I just wasn't rooting for Amber, if I'm being honest, even though she was the main character. This book also took a very dark turn towards the end, and there was a very graphic scene that involved SA. So I would definitely say look up the triggers beforehand, because I had no idea that there was going to be a scene like that in this book. I didn't really see the point of adding that scene, and it was just a little too graphic for me. Overall, I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars, if I remember correctly. But yeah, definitely my least favorite Alice Feeney book so far, and I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it. Also, I think this was her first book, so I'm going to give it a pass and just forget that this one exists, to be honest. The next Alice Feeney book that I read was Rock, Paper, Scissors. Again, another psychological thriller. This one is more of a domestic thriller. It follows a married couple who is struggling in their marriage, and in one last effort to try to save their relationship, they head off for a weekend away in Scotland. But as soon as they arrive to their destination, weird and creepy things start to happen, and they quickly realize that they're not alone. And it doesn't help that they don't trust one another, and they're both lying to one another. So throughout the book, you're kind of like trying to figure out who's actually innocent in this marriage and who's not the victim. I don't know. It was a very confusing book. I was confused for like 80% of this book. I had no idea what was happening. I did not guess any of the twists. The ending came as a big shocker for me. For that reason, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Honestly, I could probably give it a 4.5 because I enjoyed it so much. There were certain parts in the book that were quite slow, which is why I'm not giving it a whole 5-star rating. But overall, I really did enjoy this book. It's definitely one of my favorite Alice Feeney books. It comes second to Daisy Darker, but this one definitely is really good, and I definitely understand the hype. So if you're looking for a really good thriller to just spend the day reading, because this book is actually pretty short, I think it's only like 290 pages, so you'll probably be able to finish this in one sitting. If you're looking for a good thriller, definitely pick up this book because I definitely recommend it and I enjoyed it immensely. I also read 2 Frida McFadden's books. I actually read them on the Kindle app on my phone. The first book that I read from her was One by One, and this one basically follows a married group of friends who are spending the week away together together in like a cabin or something. I don't really remember. But halfway to getting to their destination, their car breaks down, so they are forced to walk the rest of the way, which involves them going into the woods, and they quickly get lost. One by one, they start to get picked off, and they're trying to figure out if there's an animal hunting them or if it's actually one of them who's killing their friend group. It just didn't seem realistic, and when I read the ending, I was like, really? That's the ending? That's the big twist? It also didn't help that all the characters were super sketchy, so I really wasn't rooting for any of them. This book just really didn't do it for me. That's literally all I have on that one. Well, I gave One by One 3 out of 5 stars, and this next book that I read from her actually ended up giving a 2 out of 5 stars, and it's called The Inmate. It follows a nurse practitioner who starts work at a maximum security prison. It also so happens to be the prison where her ex-boyfriend, her high school boyfriend, is serving life in prison for attempting to kill her. She was actually the reason why he was able to be convicted in the first place. No one in the prison knows their relationship except for them two. This one was another book where it was just super unrealistic, and the main character was so frustrating at times. Like, she was a nurse practitioner, but she was so naive and so gullible, so easily manipulated, and I found myself getting frustrated with her throughout the book. This is another thriller that just didn't do it for me, if I'm being honest, and it's probably my least favorite freedom novel. I don't know if I would recommend this book, to be honest, just because, again, it was a little boring. It was pretty slow. I was able to guess one of the twists in this book. I wasn't able to guess the second half of the twist, but again, it just was super unrealistic to me, and I had more questions by the end of it that I was just like, what did I just read? The next book that I read is a very popular book talk book, and I had high hopes for it. It is a YA romance, which I normally don't like YA books, but I had super high hopes for this one since it's super popular and everyone raves about it, but it was just not for me. And that book was If He Had Been With Me. We basically get Autumn's point of view and get to see how her and her relationship with Finn evolved throughout their high school years. You can probably guess what the ending is going to be from the title alone, and in the first chapter you already know what's going to happen, which kind of took away the emotional punch of the plot line for me. By the time I finished reading this book, I did not cry, I did not feel sad. I was just kind of left feeling underwhelmed, and I thought that overall the book was kind of meh. The writing was okay. I found myself skimming through a lot of the chapters because there was a lot of filler that really didn't add anything to the overall plot. Maybe I would have liked it more or related to this book more had I read it when I was in high school myself, and I kind of wish I had gotten Finn's point of view in this book. I feel like if I had gotten his point of view as well, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, and it may have made me a little bit more emotional towards the end, but since it was only Autumn's point of view, I kind of was just bored with this book. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars, and I don't think it's worth all the hype it gets, but if you do enjoy YA romances, and then maybe give it a try. Maybe you'll have a different opinion than I do when it comes to this book. Let me know in the comments below some of the books that you read in March. Did you have a good reading month? Did you have a meh reading month? I would love to know. Overall, I feel like I had a pretty good month. Obviously there were some hit or misses, but I feel like the books that I really loved made up for the ones that I didn't really enjoy. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's video. Really hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you did, don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I would love to have you a part of my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.